Would you risk your life for a child who isn't yours if the whole world was convinced you were the villain? Hi, I'm David Ellis. I'm 62 years old and I've seen a lot in my lifetime. Wars, injustice, moments of kindness that changed lives. But what I witnessed last fall in Whitestone Park shook me in a way I'll never forget. If you've ever felt judged for how you look, if you've ever seen someone punished for doing the right thing, then listen closely, because this story will stay with you long after it ends. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The leaves were turning golden, the breeze crisp, the kind of morning that makes you believe the world is still good. That's when Janet, a local woman known more for her nosiness than her kindness, spotted something, or rather, someone that didn't sit right with her. A young black man, maybe in his early 30s, was rushing through the park, clutching a crying white girl in his arms. To Janet, it didn't matter that the man looked panicked but protective, or that the little girl had her arms wrapped around his neck like she trusted him. All she saw was a threat, and all she needed was a reason to act. Her voice rang out like a gunshot. "Stop! Kidnapper!" She had already called the police before she even asked a single question. By the time the sirens screamed through the trees, the man was surrounded. Guns drawn, orders shouted, no time for explanations, no interest in truth. But here's the part no one expected. The girl, Emily, didn't cry for help. She didn't run away. She clung tighter. And when the officers tried to pull them apart, Marcus didn't fight to escape. He fought to protect. What came next unraveled everything this quiet little town thought it knew about heroes, villains, and the devastating cost of assumptions. Stay with me, because this story isn't just about race, justice, or innocence. It's about what we do when the truth stares us in the face and whether we're brave enough to look it in the eye. Because in that moment, standing there in the middle of Whitestone Park, no one wanted to see the truth. They only saw what they feared. The officers didn't hesitate. Hands in the air, step away from the girl. The command cracked through the crisp autumn air like lightning. Marcus slowly knelt down, keeping his voice even. "It's okay, Emily, I've got you." He gently set her down on the grass and lifted his hands. His fingers trembled, not with guilt, but with the weight of knowing how this would look, how this always looked. "I'm not a kidnapper," he said, his tone calm but urgent. She needed help. But words in that moment meant little. The officers didn't ask questions. They didn't kneel to speak to Emily. Instead, one reached for his cuffs while another moved behind Marcus, gun still drawn. Then it happened. Emily screamed, not a scared scream, but one of protest. "No, he didn't take me. He's helping me." Her small voice cracked with tears. "Please, he's the only one who listened." The officers paused, just for a beat, but it was enough for Marcus to do the unthinkable. He ran. He scooped Emily back into his arms and darted down the slope toward the wooded end of the park. Not to escape justice, but to escape injustice. The sirens behind him roared louder, boots pounded, and above it all, the voice of Janet, still shouting from the bench near the fountain, cut through the chaos. "I knew it, I told you, that filthy criminal stealing our children." A woman sitting nearby gasped. A jogger stopped in his tracks. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't just a suspect, he was the story of the day, a villain, a headline in the making. But what no one knew, not yet, was why Emily was crying when Janet first saw them, or why Marcus had been running in the first place. No one knew about the call he'd received 20 minutes earlier from Emily herself, whispering through sobs that Lena can't breathe and that her father just walked away. No one knew that Emily had slipped out of her mansion barefoot, running across town to the only man who'd ever believed her, the only man who hadn't laughed when she told him what was happening in her father's factory. The chase lasted minutes but felt eternal. At the far end of the park, Marcus ducked into a maintenance shed, holding Emily close, trying to catch his breath. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, her arms still tight around his neck. "I didn't know who else to call." Outside, the radio static of police scanners crackled. Officers shouted coordinates. The world thought they were closing in on a criminal. But what they were really doing was chasing the one person who had the courage to care. And as Marcus looked into Emily's tear-streaked face, he knew something deeper than fear. He felt resolve. Whatever happened next, he wasn't going to let the truth die in that park. Not with so many little voices still unheard, not when one of them had finally been brave enough to speak. Marcus knew he couldn't outrun the police forever, but he could buy enough time to save the ones no one else seemed to care about. The real victims weren't just the ones left crying in parks. They were the ones hidden behind factory walls and locked doors, breathing poison, working with bleeding hands, and forgotten. But to everyone else, Marcus was still just a suspect on the run. And for the next few hours, his name, his face, and his so-called crime were plastered across every local news channel. The headlines were merciless. Man abducts girl, flees police in broad daylight. Photos of Marcus mid-sprint, clutching Emily, circulated like wildfire. No one questioned the narrative. Why would they? Back at police headquarters, Chief Randall paced behind his desk, tension written across his lined face. "This has to be handled fast," he muttered to his team. "The girl's father is Dr. Howard Grayson. We mess this up and heads will roll." Emily's father. Dr. Grayson wasn't just another wealthy man with influence. He was a state-funded scientist, revered for his work in automation. His factory powered half the region's robotics, but no one knew what it cost. At that very moment, miles from the city center, Marcus wasn't hiding, he was knocking, quietly on the rusted back door of an old warehouse at the edge of town. "Let me in," he whispered through the gap. "It's me, it's Marcus." A small face peeked out, a boy no older than 10. "You came back?" "I promised I would." Inside, the warehouse told a story no one wanted to hear. Children, dozens of them, mostly black, sat on crates, their eyes hollow, hands blistered. The air was thick with dust and fumes. Machines whirred in the background, machines far too large, far too dangerous for children. Emily stepped in behind him and gasped. "Lena!" she cried, running to a fragile girl lying on a threadbare blanket. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow. Marcus immediately opened his bag, pulling out medical supplies. "She's still holding on, but not for long." That's when the pounding began. The police had found them. "Come out with your hands up," a voice thundered through a megaphone. "This is your last warning." Marcus didn't flinch. He pressed the syringe gently into Lena's arm. Her tiny hand twitched. Emily turned to the window and froze. "It's my dad. He's with them." Dr. Grayson stood tall beside Chief Randall, arms crossed, his gaze locked on the building like it was just another lab experiment. "Bring out my daughter and the criminal," he ordered coldly. And then, just as officers prepared to storm the building, Emily stepped outside. With her small hands held high, she shouted, "Stop! He's not a criminal. He's saving my friend." The police paused. Marcus emerged slowly behind her, arms raised. Then Lena's cough echoed through the open door. One officer moved forward, saw the children inside, and everything changed. Gus lowered, eyes widened. The warehouse wasn't a hideout, it was a rescue. But the men standing outside couldn't see it yet. To them, Marcus was still the threat. Dr. Howard Grayson, the man who built machines that fueled entire industries, stood silent, his expression unreadable as the truth began leaking through the cracks. Chief Randall, for a moment, looked unsure. He stared at the children behind the open doors, their fragile frames casting long shadows in the dusty light. Something didn't fit the narrative they'd rehearsed. A junior officer whispered, "Chief, this doesn't look like a kidnapping. It looks like a labor camp." Grayson's jaw tightened. "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. "Those are trespassers, street kids. They've broken into my storage unit. That man used my daughter to cover his tracks." But even as he spoke, a little boy stepped forward, maybe 7, maybe 8. He clutched a greasy wrench in one hand, his knuckles raw. His voice, barely above a whisper, floated out. "He'd said he'd save us." Another girl chimed in. "He brought medicine for Lena. No one else ever did." And then Emily, still standing between her father and Marcus, looked up at the chief and said softly, "Dad made them work here. He told me not to tell. He said they weren't real children." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Chief Randall turned. "Is this true?" he asked. Grayson laughed, a low, sharp sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Do you know how many patents I hold, how many jobs I've created? Do you think I'd waste time kidnapping children?" Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady, low. "You didn't waste time. You exploited it. You didn't steal their names. You stole their breath. I've treated kids in your school clinic for nosebleeds, chest pain, nausea. Every time I've filed reports, every time no one listened. But Emily did." And Grayson stepped forward. "You're a glorified nurse, Marcus. Don't talk to me about sacrifice. I built an empire." "You built it on their backs," Marcus answered. The officers entered the warehouse now carefully, slowly. They didn't find tools and automation. They found stained mattresses, buckets for toilets, a ledger listing first names and daily work quotas. It wasn't a storage space, it was a system, and had been running for years. One officer brought out a small tablet and handed it to the chief. "We found video logs. Some of them show Dr. Grayson in the facility giving orders. It's all here." The truth was no longer hiding. And yet Grayson didn't flinch. "I did what needed to be done," he growled. "Those children were going nowhere. I gave them purpose. I gave them use." Emily's eyes welled with tears. "You said Lena wasn't worth saving, that she was replaceable." "Because she is," he barked. "They're all disposable. Cheap labor. Weak lungs, small hands, perfect for assembly. You think I got my contracts by paying union rates? You think innovation comes cheap?" No one moved until Chief Randall did. With a breath that seemed to shake his shoulders, the chief turned to his men. "Place him under arrest. Now." "What?" Grayson shouted. "You can't. I own this town." But even his guards, once loyal, had begun to step back. There was no hiding from the truth now. Their cuffs clicked around his wrists. In that moment, for the first time, Grayson looked small, not in stature, but in spirit. His empire, his name, his prestige crumbled under the weight of the children he'd treated like machines. And Marcus? Marcus stood still, watching as Lena, now breathing easier, was lifted onto a stretcher. She reached out weakly, and Marcus took her hand. "You're safe now," he whispered. Emily came beside him and slid her hand into his. "You didn't run to escape. You ran to save her." He nodded. "And I'd do it again." For those of us who have lived through decades of change, through wars, protests, and the slow march of justice, this story is a reminder. Not every hero wears a badge or carries a title. Sometimes they're the ones the world misjudges the fastest. And sometimes the villains live in mansions and smile for cameras while quietly breaking the backs of the forgotten. But not today. Today someone spoke up, someone listened, and a quiet man with nothing to gain gave everything he had to do the right thing. Because that's what real character is. But sometimes character is tested in the moments no one sees coming. As officers loaded Grayson into the back of the police cruiser, the crowd that had gathered outside the warehouse began to murmur. Word had spread. Reporters were already circling the block. A few camera flashes pierced the dusky evening light. Emily stood close to Marcus, her small hand still nestled in his. The children were being helped into ambulances, given blankets, water, and for the first time in who knows how long, comfort. And then, just as the chief exhaled a breath of grim resolution, there was a sound. A sharp metallic click. Everyone turned. One of Grayson's private security men had pulled a weapon from inside his jacket. In the commotion, he'd managed to avoid being searched, and now, in one swift move, he had crossed the barrier and grabbed Emily from Marcus's side. "No one moves," the man barked, pressing the barrel to the child's head. "He goes free, or the girl dies." Marcus instinctively stepped forward, but the guard shoved the gun tighter against Emily's temple. "Back off!" The police froze. Even the chief was stunned. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Finishing what he started," the guard spat. "You think you're heroes now, arresting a man who made this country stronger? These kids were tools. That's all. You're all too soft to understand." Marcus could feel his chest tightening. Emily's eyes were wide, not with fear, but something sharper. Focus. Resolve. Because this wasn't the first time she'd been used as leverage, and it wouldn't be the last unless she ended it. What happened next caught everyone off guard. Emily, breathing hard, glanced toward Marcus. Then, without warning, she slammed her heel down on the guard's instep. As he cried out in pain, she twisted in his grip and bit down on his arm with everything she had. He howled, just long enough for Marcus to lunge forward and knock the weapon from his hand. The gun skidded across the pavement. Officers swarmed in, pinning the man to the ground. Emily stumbled backward into Marcus's arms. He caught her, held her tight. "You're okay," he whispered, breathless. She looked up at him. "Not brave," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Just tired of being scared." And in that moment, surrounded by sirens, cameras, and the rush of adults scrambling to make sense of the chaos, it wasn't the police or the press or even Marcus who delivered the final blow. It was a 9-year-old girl who refused to be anyone's pawn. The chief walked over slowly, his face etched with disbelief. "She saved herself," he said quietly. Marcus nodded. "She's been saving everyone all along." The chief didn't say another word. He simply stepped back and let it all unfold. Because what came next didn't belong to the police or the press or even the court. It belonged to the truth. Within 24 hours, federal agents had arrived. The warehouse was cordoned off and Grayson's factory was shut down. Investigators uncovered decades of buried documents, falsified employee records, and offshore payments to silence the few who had once dared to ask questions. The entire operation had been wrapped in glossy brochures and corporate awards, but inside it was rotting. For many in town, the fall of Dr. Howard Grayson was unthinkable. He'd been their pride, their headline, their local genius, but the mask had cracked wide open, and what lay beneath wasn't brilliance, it was cruelty dressed in ambition. Grayson stood trial a month later. The courtroom was packed. His lawyers argued mental strain, corporate pressure, even misplaced intentions, but none of it could wipe away the testimonies of the children. One by one, they took the stand. Shaky, soft-spoken, but unwavering. Lena spoke last, her lungs still healing, her voice barely above a whisper. She told the court what it meant to lose a childhood, while building machines that made other people rich. And when Emily stepped up, looked to her father in the eyes, and said, "You told me they didn't matter, but they do," a hush fell over the room. Not even the judge could look away. The verdict, guilty on all counts. Dr. Howard Grayson was sentenced to life in prison without parole. No applause followed, no victory dance, just a deep collective exhale. Justice finally had found its place. Marcus was cleared of all charges, but he didn't walk out of the courthouse alone. He walked out holding Lena's hand, with Emily beside him. He didn't return to the school clinic. Instead, with the help of the community, he opened a center for at-risk children in the very warehouse where it all began. They called it the Lighthouse because even in the darkest moments, it stood for safety and direction. Emily visited often. She never called Marcus her hero, though others did. She called him her friend. And for the kids who walked through those doors, unsure of who they could trust, Marcus became something even more important than a rescuer. He became someone who listened. For those of us who've lived long enough to know how complicated the world can be, this story offers something rare: clarity, a reminder that real strength doesn't come from titles or money or power. It comes from doing what's right, even when no one's watching. But sometimes the person who's cast aside is the one holding everyone together. Sometimes justice takes its time, but it arrives carried by small hands and unwavering hearts. And sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who never wanted to be noticed at all. Marcus never asked for headlines. He never looked for recognition. All he wanted was to make sure no child was ever forgotten again. Months passed. The seasons changed. But in the heart of the old warehouse, now freshly painted and filled with laughter instead of machines, the legacy of courage lived on. Children who had once worked in silence now learned to read, paint, sing, and dream. Some still carry the scars, physical and emotional, but day by day their eyes grew brighter. Hope, once a stranger, had become a friend. Emily came often. She planted a small garden in the yard out back, sunflowers mostly. They always turned toward the light, she said. Marcus helped her build a wooden bench beside it. Sometimes they'd just sit in silence, watching the wind ripple through the petals. One afternoon, a reporter asked Marcus if he ever regretted stepping in that day at the park. He smiled gently. "Regret?" he said. "No. If I hadn't done something, I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror. And the truth is, I didn't save those kids. They saved me." That's what this story is really about. Not just injustice, not just redemption, but transformation. The kind that happens when ordinary people choose to stand up, even when the cost is high. The kind that begins not in courtrooms or headlines, but in quiet decisions to act, to protect, to believe in someone others have forgotten. If you've lived long enough, you know the world doesn't always reward goodness. Sometimes it punishes it. But stories like Marcus's remind us why we still choose kindness, why we still speak up, why we still believe that the smallest voice, when it tells the truth, can echo louder than any lie. So if this story touched your heart, and if it made you think of someone brave in your own life, or if it reminded you that doing the right thing matters even when no one's watching, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Here we tell stories that deserve to be heard, stories of resilience, truth, and quiet heroes just like Marcus, and maybe just like you. Thank you for watching, and remember, even in the darkest moments, a single act of courage can light the way.